Greetings. Thank you all for tuning in for another video. Trust that you're glad to see me as I'm glad to see you. So, chances are that you're very familiar with the flaws in the United States healthcare system. I, like many of you, detest it and hate it and think that there are many things that need to improve with it. Now, several weeks ago, there was an incident that drew attention to these flaws even more. And in case you're not aware of the incident that I'm referring to, let me give a very brief synopsis. So several weeks ago, there was a fatal shooting of now former CEO of United Health Group, Brian Thompson, which took place in New York City. And following that event, the perpetrator of that crime, the shooting, fled the scene. A manhunt ensued for several days and eventually ended in the arrest of a young man by the name of Luigi Mangione. Now, coinciding with this, right, a lot of people have attempted to make guesses or surmise what the motive or intent behind the shooting was. And most people applying common sense and also fueled by their, to be frank, resentment against the healthcare industry and those who comprise it, have basically come to the conclusion that the shooter was motivated by a desire to retaliate against not Brian Thompson in particular, but what Brian Thompson represented, the CEO of this company. And what he represented was an organization which profits off of the apparent suffering and death of a lot of people. And so there have been many people who have sort of participated in this movement of supporting, praising, and even championing as a hero the perpetrator of the shooting. And I myself, and likely many of you, are probably very alarmed by that. You probably think like, man, what does it say about the social and cultural climate that we now have, certainly not a majority, I don't think, but a significant portion of the population that is so embittered by, the way things are, that they would go so far as to champion someone who just assassinated another person. And so rather than get on here and go on a rant, I figured it'd be more productive to have a very logical and level-headed discussion, rational discussion about this. And so I encourage everyone, as always, to engage in this conversation by leaving comments or questions or critiques and opinions down in the comment section. I would love to hear from you, and I would love to respond to you. And so that being said, I'll go ahead and present from my perspective what people who support, the shooter think, or how they think about it. Okay, so the logic seems to be that because this CEO presided over a company which is responsible for the suffering and deaths of a lot of people, that is through denying, for example, health, coverage for certain health treatment, that the shooter was justified in eliminating him. Okay. Now, the problem that I have found with this stance is that it sets a certain moral precedent. And what I mean by that is, if we contend that any one person can be judge, jury, and executioner to take into their own hands the elimination of any and everyone that they perceive to be a threat to themselves, their values, their beliefs, or even society as a whole, if we contend that that is true, then we have just set a precedent that we can not only employ against others, but that can be employed against us. The idea that any and every person has their own moral compass that they can apply and then use in order to assume the role of judge, jury, and executioner is an incredibly dangerous one. The thing is like, I totally understand anybody who wants reform, who wants change, who wants people who are apparently responsible for immoral or even criminal acts acting on the behalf of these health organizations to be held accountable. I get that 100%, but to go so far as to suggest that we can just in any and every instance commit fatal shootings against people just because we perceive them to be a threat, I think is it's not a merit-worthy belief. I think it's an incredibly dangerous one. Now, on the other hand, if we contend that that is wrong, we are still left with the same problem. We're still left with this apparent observation, which a lot of people have made, which is that our healthcare system is corrupt. In many ways, it's ineffective. It's contrary to preserving and sustaining and actually helping people with their health, maintaining their health, and giving them the health treatment that they need. There is no easy way to get around this problem. There is no easy way to respond to it. And I don't claim to be someone who has all the answers or the solutions, but I just wanted to come at this from the standpoint of somebody who's speaking out of an abundance of common sense. Now, it's clear to me that there are certain problems in life that we're presented with that are best solved by being prevented. That is, sometimes the best way to solve a problem is by ensuring that it never exists in the first place. And I'm sure that a lot of you out there are probably well aware of the fact that we're facing a health epidemic in the United States. One that has largely been precipitated by our way of life. And what I mean by that is, guys, at the end of the day, the reason why so many people in our society are unhealthy, the reason why we have such a high demand for so-called medical and health treatment in the first place, is because on a daily basis, we are consuming things, ingesting things, engaging in behaviors that are not conducive to our health. They don't engender good human health, okay? Optimal human health. You know, everything from the machines we're using, the media we consume, the food we eat, the substances we ingest, even the water we drink. You know, there's microplastics, carcinogens, all these toxins, added sugars, seed oils, trans fats, just the whole nine. All these things that interfere with our biology, our psychology, and have very big consequences for our society as a whole, because it affects the way that we interact not only with each other, but also the institutions, the organizations that are supposed to be operating on our behalf. You know, everybody wants to complain about the problem. You know, we want to identify the problem, and yet we don't want to acknowledge that the problem was in part largely created by the way of life that we have been promoting for the past several decades, you know, for the past several centuries nearly, and or more, you could argue. And so what I'm suggesting in this video is not to put the blame onto any and every ordinary person who's just out here trying to live their life and survive, and who's basically trying to do the best with the circumstances that have been handed down to them. I get that as an ordinary person, we don't have a preponderance of control over the circumstances that influence our life. I get that 100%. But at some point, guys, like we have to realize that there are two options. We're either going to change things through pursuing violence, or we're going to change things by pursuing more diplomatic means, more peaceful means. And so I suggest, as always, as I always have suggested, it's core to my personal philosophy, which is be the change you want to see in the world. You know, if you look around in the world and you see things that you're dissatisfied and discontent with, make a point to live differently than others. Make a point to do what you think is right. You know, make a logical decision. If you see the direct connection between our way of life and these undesirable outcomes, then optimize your way of life, change your way of life. You know, if everybody did that, if we, for example, boycotted these multinational global corporations that are feeding us all this junk and making us unhealthy, they would change. You know, if we all rose up together, you know, unanimously and in one mind and one accord, if we all took it upon ourselves to pursue radical change. And I'm not talking about tearing up stuff. I'm not talking about burning down, you know, buildings and, you know, trying to raise mayhem. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, guys, if through our way of life we send a clear message, then things will change. Because let me tell you something. It's not about just making an impression on these so-called organizations, whether they be public or private or otherwise. It's not about making a strong impression on them. It's about making a strong impression, a stronger impression on future generations. You see, because any change that is undertaken must be maintained and sustained over time. If we believe that there is a nobler way, a more virtuous way, a way that is, with respects to human health, a no-brainer, then let's pursue that like our life depends on it, because it does. Let's pursue it like our children's lives depends on it, because it does. Okay? And so I know this is likely not what a lot of you wanted to hear. It's likely, it's not the most expedient solution. It's not one that doesn't entail a lot of sacrifice. It does. It entails a great deal of sacrifice. But if you think that the answer, the solution lies in government or politics, newsflash, our government and our politics got us into this mess. I don't mean to insult anyone when I say this, but a lot of you have a very poor knowledge of history, and in many cases that's not your fault. But let me go ahead and remind you that for the past several decades, government agencies such as the FDA, the USDA, the FTC, and the so-called health organizations have all been making guidelines and giving us instructions that are just totally wrong, totally false with respects to our how best to maintain our health. And I'm not saying that these agencies or organizations aren't good for anything. Obviously they're necessary to an extent, but it's just important to see things squarely and just acknowledge that there have been a lot of ulterior motives. There has been a lot of corruption. There have been countless instances of entities, individuals, organizations, institutions who purport to serve the public interest, and in fact, as I said earlier, they prioritize making money over human health, over human well-being. And so I'm not going to beat a dead horse. Hopefully I got the point across. If you like this video, like it. If you dislike it, dislike it. If you think it might be of interest to someone share it with them. As always, I encourage you to engage in these conversations. Leave a comment down in the comment section below if you have any questions, concerns, critiques, opinions, anything to add. If you think that there's something worth expounding on, go ahead and do that. I again always encourage that. So anyway, until next time, bye-bye.